Two. Hello, can you all hear me? Are you there? Is anybody there? Am I there? Where is there? That kind of thing is usually what I ask right now, so let me know if someone's there. Hello, can you hear me? Or have I fucked this up again? Which is realistic. Or is maybe no one there, which is also realistic, I guess. Hello, can you hear me? Am I there? What's going on? I hope you can hear me, because once again, feedback's not exactly what I'm good at, I guess. Okay, I cannot yet read chat, but maybe I can. We'll see what happens. Gods, this is awkward. I should figure this out in a better way in the future. Maybe my internet's dead, or I'm just dead, which is also possible, I guess. Or is something wrong? Who knows? This must be really boring for you to watch. I'll give you a chance, though, to see something rare before we actually start. Yes, I'm drinking tea. For now. Don't worry. Hey, so can you hear me? Wow. Okay, I guess you can hear me, which is good. Hi, everyone. I'm glad you can all hear me and see me, and hope it's worth it. Perfect. Hey, Ori. Hey, Elliot. There's a lot of people here. I'm shocked. Yeah, I planned to, have a lot of people here today, which is why I made this video, which hopefully makes a lot of people angry, and we can watch in live how my channel loses subscribers. And to that and many other things, I bid you welcome and cheers. Yeah, works well. So yeah, I figured we'll do the usual monthly thing where I talk about books and stuff, and thank you all for being there, and try to interact with you in a non-creepy way, which is, something I'm definitely good at. I hope. Hey, Jin. Jin or Gin? I never know how to pronounce your name. It's the H behind the G that kind of confuses me. Well, as to the thumbnail, there's an idea behind that. I can, which, makes sense. I'll explain it in a minute. I can tell you that YouTube's automatic checking thing for monetization sent me a message and said there were no issues found with it. Now, I understand that it comes across as somewhat, how can I say this, objectifying. I'm aware of that. We will see how that goes. My argument is, yes, you can see that as objectifying. It certainly is up to a point. My thinking behind, taking a publicly available image of a famous streamer, in this case Amaranth, and was exactly that, because if you're out there and looking at, these discourses about stuff, the whole simps part is very much tied to that kind of character. I personally think the discourse is really dumb, which is why I kind of chose that image to drive that idea home. But I agree, but I accept that it can come across as somewhat sexist. On the other hand, there's Brandon Sanderson's face on it, so maybe it'll also piss off some, trans phobes and stuff. Might be an idea. Yeah, cheers, biggest. So just like the drink, gin. Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks. I wanted to know that. I'm glad you you appreciate the idea, Jeroen. Jeroen, that I doubt it'll be taken offline. As I said, when you monetize videos, YouTube does check before you can publish them whether they are suitable for monetization. And turns out that I got a message from YouTube saying that yes, it is. Also, oh, it's not a metaphor for capitalism. Don't worry. That's not my point. It's literally just about the about the simps part. Why is it transphobic though? I don't. Well, I mean, I'm willing to hear you out on that one because, as I said, it is somewhat edgy. Oh, that's interesting. Jin, I didn't know that. As I said, I'm perfectly willing, perfectly fine and willing to hear our arguments about that and so forth. Literally, I mean, I had this idea on my way back. I was thinking about the whole Brandon Sanderson. We'll definitely talk more about it during the stream, I'm pretty sure. I had this idea about the whole Sanderson stuff. I mean, I've been thinking about it ever since I read the Wired article on Thursday. And then the whole thing panned out yesterday, and everyone was making their videos about it, and I was like, oh, God. And then this morning, I decided to, last moment, like, the shop up here where I live closes at like 2 p.m. and at like 1:30 I ran over there because I realized I needed to, buy food for the weekend, which makes sense, or so I've heard. And then I also bought more beer because I figured maybe I'd need it. And on the way back, which is just like 200 meters or 300 meters, and at some point I just literally had this like idea. It's like, bam, the title was there. And the idea for the thumbnail was there, which is not something that happens usually. And I figured I'll just go with the inspiration. And for the moment, I was like, can I actually do this, or will this literally piss off way too many people? And I was like, well, I don't know. I was a bit unsure. And then I listened to a lot of very good punk rock, and then I was like, yeah, fuck it, let's do it and see what happens. So that's sort of how the video happened. And I mean, if you watch the video, it's way more sober, I guess, than the title and thumbnail suggest. But I've heard about the clickbait thing, and it's something that I figured I'll try for once. We'll be back with more serious ideas very soon. So that's sort of how I figured the whole thing would be. But I'm very much willing to hear anyone out on the whole subject, whether it's transphobic. I don't think, as I said, like, it's not meant as a metaphor for capitalism at all. So I don't think it is a sexist. Also, I figure, at the end of the day, having someone very conservative and Mormon portrayed in that way might be more subversive than you might think. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about it, Chadia. That's how do you pronounce your name? Is it Chadia, or is it Kadia, or is it Katya? I've no idea, because yeah, spellings and stuff. I'm happy to learn, as you all know, sometimes at least. So yeah, I've been thinking about the Sanderson thing for a long time. In fact, I did actually start, and this is funny, I did actually start a video project last year in May, June, something like that. It's still on my computer. I recorded like 1 or 2 parts, and then I never finished the whole thing because, I lost steam and all of these kind of ideas. And it is currently called A Church History of Fantasy Discourse or something like that. We'll see. Let me check. I can find out. No. Church History of Literary Discourse, and it was so the idea for the video was to look at how literary discourse changed from a very much authorial intent as interpreted through the sort of chosen privileged people of literary critics and so forth, how something like Death of the Author had a very revolutionary approach to that by taking that away and giving the power into the hands of the reader, to then look at how the internet changed that first into like democratizing it even more, because everyone had a voice and everyone could use their websites and whatever to voice their ideas about it, and how that whole thing then got co-opted by platforms and social media, which moved the author as a person back into the center of attention, but with a way more direct access of everyone to the author, which does make swing back to authorial intent, but because of the way that parasocial relationships and shit like that work, even empowering the idea of authorial intent to an unhealthy degree, because obviously I do believe that it is wise to hear out authors about what they wanted to say, and then make your own judgment whether you trust them or not, or whether the work actually achieves what they set out to do. That's sort of something I personally appreciate. So that was the idea, and I wanted to look at it through because I wanted to parallel it to the idea of church history with schisms and the idea of Protestantism being sort of when you take away the privilege of interpretation of the divine law, which is what priests used to do when they were the only ones who can read the Bible and interpret the Bible, which is what you get in Catholicism, right? To switch that to the goals of of Protestantism, and then move on to what I would call and I still love to call, the apotheosis of the author, because now the author might have been dead, but now the authors are now not only reborn, so to speak, but almost deified in the way that they rule over their fans in like direct access and stuff like that. It was a really good idea at the time, I felt, and then I didn't finish the whole project, and ideas that I've have had about the whole thing have come out afterwards in individual videos, when I talked about like how BookTube sort of does tend away from actual discourse towards presentation of a celebration of consumerism in a way, and stuff like that. It has leaked into all of these ideas, and now that the Brandon Sanderson thing happened yesterday, a couple of days ago, that bit kind of came back into my mind, and that's sort of how I ended up with the whole thing. Hey Johnny, hey ASDQ, whatever. I will not try to pronounce that. I can tell you my screen reader is not trying to pronounce it, which is quite the achievement. Yeah, exactly, Jerome. I feel it's like the idea of a complete death of the author is very difficult to proceed, because as soon as you, as the reader, know one thing about the author beyond their name, or possibly even the name printed on like the book, right? Those things will influence your reading, just as all the things that we know influence the writing, which is sort of part of the idea that the text is written through the author, which is what you get with Roland Barthes in a way, right? So obviously that has an influence, but the point is that with authorial intent and the way it was handled back in the day, and tends to be handled nowadays. Again, or almost, the idea is that there is a correct interpretation or a one true reading of the text, and the author can decide what that true reading is. And if you interpret it in a different way, you're basically a heretic and need to be burned at the stake of, well, internet forums, I guess, Reddit, sort of. And I feel that that's sort of the point there. But yeah, it's just one data point. It may be an interesting data point if only, you want to look at whether the author succeeds in making their point. Sometimes they fail in making a point they claim they wanted to make. That's also part of interpretation and reading. So that's sort of the way I see it. And as I said, like that was the whole idea for the video, and I wanted to make it like more like a serious video essay. And then I realized that for serious video essays, I like the editing skills. I can't do BreadTube because I can't edit, basically, which is sort of the problem that I face a lot. And there is that other Brandon Sanderson video that I still want to make, which is unfortunately, a lot of work, and it would mean me having to go and read some more Brandon Sanderson to make my point even clearer. And I'm not sure if I'm mentally ready to do that, if that makes any sense, because those are thick books, and right now I'm reading a lot of Arthurian books because I got distracted, which is, there will be no Sunday school tomorrow. School's out for, well, this Sunday, I guess, because I got distracted by other books. In particular, I finally read Maror. It finally came out this week. I finally read it. I finished it this morning. It's fantastic. If you haven't read it, you need to read this book. It is brilliant. It is. It does a lot of things that I really appreciate. I'll do a video about it specifically, possibly tomorrow. And it's absolutely fantastic. I love it. I mean, love is maybe the wrong word, but I learned a lot from it. And I've only been to Israel once, but the sense of place that Tidar manages to evoke is very strong. It's very powerful. I'm very much in favor of burning things in general. I'm a pyromancer at heart, I guess. Yes, that's exactly the problem, Shadia, whatever. That you get taught like that in school to find out what's the author trying to tell us. Like, that's not the point. The point is what I make of it. Did Brandon Sanderson's writing improve the Wheel of Time books? Yes. I would say yes. In a way it does. In another way it doesn't for me. See, the thing is, it is in a lot of ways it's tighter almost written than earlier books and so forth. That works well. The problem I have is the way that Brandon Sanderson sets up action scenes. And that is very much a personal issue for me. See, the problem is Sanderson writes action scenes like computer games. Like computer game levels, which is, on the one hand, it's cool because they're three-dimensional in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of like three-dimensional action, and people are, moving up and down as well as left and right in, to get better angles and stuff like that. That's really cool. He has that to it, and you can see that even if read Mistborn with the whole idea of people using metal to float around and shit like that, right? He writes those like computer game action scenes, and that's cool on the one hand, but once you've seen him do it, every Brandon Sanderson action scene is like that, and you have a lot of these in some of the later Wheel of Time books. There's one whole thing where it's really ridiculous, which is in, I think, book 11, not book 11. Like I think it's Towers of Midnight. It might be the one before, which is something Storm. And that is the issue that it takes place in the Dreamlands thing, the that has a different name that I keep forgetting. It's something that sounds almost like Chin and Nog, but it's not. It's whatever. Anyway, it's a dream world, and one of the characters, because it's a dream world, they can do all kinds of shit in the dream world. It's a bit like lucid dreaming stuff, but also point is they can fly and move around up and down and have 3D movement in all kinds of ways. And then they move to a building and move through that building in the dream world while there is a battle, and then they pop out of the dream world and do stuff there, and it's literally like they're going through the levels of a tower, and it feels like literally reading a description of someone going through a computer, like a shooter basically. And I'm like, you're a bit too fond of showing off your skills there, Brandon. So overall, I would say they slightly improved the reading experience of Wheel of Time. I did like the narrator of Maror. He does change accents, yes. I did appreciate that. The accent sounded pretty good. I mean, from the name, I'm not sure if he's Israeli, but the name sounds. I mean, the name sounds possibly Israeli or at least Jewish. So Ori, the thing with the Maror is exactly that. It has a lot of these things where like, wow, and then you look it up and it's like, oh shit, that stuff was real. Hello, Paromita. So what exactly would you ask me to reconsider? I'm willing to discuss this and hear everyone out. That's the idea. So I'm very much open to hearing your criticism. If you think the thumbnail is sexist, yeah, it can be read that way. I'm aware of that. Mech Sog? That's interesting. That sounds weird. Yeah, the what am I saying? Yeah, the author. It's funny that he's not a well-known actor, because so much of Maror is about like name dropping all these different actors and bands that I feel like no one outside of Israel has ever heard about, which is something I find really fascinating to show how you have like international acts on the one hand, but you have this inside like local scene that is very, very specific to the country, which, I mean, yes, every country does have that to a point. We're not completely, culturally colonized by America mostly, or the UK when it comes to pop music. But there's some countries who have that more, and I found that very interesting to have that level of, verisimilitude, I guess is the word there, and I really appreciated that. A lot of other things I also really appreciated about the book. It's serious. It's still like interesting to read, and I found it interesting to compare it to what happens in A Brief History of Seven Killings, which is on the one hand like two different approaches to the same problem, which is good. On the other hand, it also has a couple of sections where they sort of intersect, which is in the latter part, when they have scenes set in Florida, among other places, and different aspects of the same cocaine trading business kind of thing of happening at the same time. And that was just like fun for me to read, like how those two sides basically intersect, where you have, on the one hand, the CIA using Jamaica as a transportation hub for cocaine from in the trade to arm and finance and support anti-communist militias and insurgents in Latin America. And on the other hand, you then have the Israeli people also doing the same thing and taking the the next step, so to speak, in partly at least in that international drug and weapons trade. That was just interesting to see how those two combine. I did appreciate that. Yeah, it's very difficult to get into the music scene of a different country. It's very difficult unless you really focus on it, or you maybe know people from a different country and they tell you about their local music, art, literature, whatever scene. It's very difficult. I mean, frankly, at this point, I don't even know what's part of like the German music scene, because I don't listen to the radio or anything. So I've got no idea what's like big in Germany right now. Can't even tell you. Yeah, so yeah, Maror, great book. I really loved it, and now I'm back to the oh, so you can speak some Korean, Jin? I mean, didn't you like live in Japan or something for a while? I think I remember you saying that somewhere sometime. But yeah, yeah, it's difficult to get into the different cultures in that way. Yeah, so the Sunday school thing, I kind of like did the thing that I usually do, which is I had an idea, and then I said, "Hey, I'll do that." Remember when I was like, while I was recording the video, the Sunday school video for last week about fantasy and mythology and myth, and I was like, "Yeah, I will do a second part when we talk more about that." And then while I was recording the weekly navel gazing weekly wrap up kind of thing that I did on Monday, like literally while recording the video, I was like, yeah, and the next one will be about Arthurian mythology. And I just said that on the spot, and then because it felt right in that moment, and now I'm like, okay, but I need to do more research on that. So now I've actually, spent Audible credits on Mists of Avalon and Spear by Nicola Griffith, and I already owned some other Arthurian retellings. And I'm, basically, now that I'm done with Maror, I'm going to binge read all of these books, and also reading, academic literature on Arthurian stuff. And the next video will be about mythology, and Arthurian mythology and fantasy. Because my idea was, in my brain it made sense. Like my idea was to have like 2 videos on mythology and fantasy, at least for now, myth and fantasy. And the first one is sort of like the what I would call the horizontal. Yeah, the horizontal approach to myth, where you have when you talk about the Fianna Fáil tapestry, we talk about Guy Gavriel Kay taking different myths and combining them into the mythology for his world as world building. And the second video will be on the vertical thing, where you take one myth, in this case Arthurian legend, which is obviously not a myth but a legend if you take the taxonomy or terminology invented by the Grimms. But never mind, it's that kind of thing, right? And you take that and you go through the ages and look at how that myth got changed over time and how that myth got adapted in different ways, which I think will be really helpful. And I obviously picked Arthurian legend because Arthur shows up in Fianna Fáil as well. I don't have the Crystal Cave, no. I have obviously the Once and Future King. I have read By Force Alone by Lavi Tidar many times, but maybe if I have enough time, I'll just reread it for a treat because it's so much fun. But yeah, it's definitely Mist of Avalon and definitely Spear, because I feel those two are important aspects. Ideally, I would probably also have to have a look at what's his name, Bernard Cornwell's Winter King Warlord trilogy, whatever it's called. Everyone loves it, and I believe I will absolutely hate it. But that's sort of ideally I would do that as well, but it's a lot of reading, right? And I could have done the same thing, because I did that as a term paper for university back when I was studying history, right? When I looked at the way the Theseus myth changed over time, as far as we can tell, which is really interesting to look at, because what happens with Theseus is Sorry, I got to tell you that because, you know, I wrote a term paper on it. It actually is pretty good. So the interesting thing with Theseus is, like, we know the story sort of, right? It's the guy who kills the Minotaur, and that's sort of what some people know. And for a long time, that was like the main thing we knew about Theseus. But over time, other stuff gets added. And you can look at, for example, the first part of the Theseus story, which is Theseus traveling to Athens from his birthplace. And that part, that story where he does these different tasks sort of on the way, like he takes the long road, and there's all these different challenges he has to overcome. There's the guy Procrustes with the bed that he makes you fit by, you know, either chopping off your head and legs, or stretching you until you fit the bed perfectly. And there's a bunch of other challenges. And the interesting thing there is that got added later when tensions between the Doric-speaking Greeks on the Peloponnesus and the Ionic Greeks living in Athens kind of got higher, because Heracles was a Doric hero, and he's like more like most of his stuff happens around the Peloponnesus, as far as you can. So he was a Doric hero, and the guys especially in Attica and especially in Athens, were like, well, we need a hero, we need our own superhero for that. And they looked around, and was like, well, we got Theseus, so let's add those elements to Theseus' story. And you compare them to the challenges of Heracles, and they're like similar but different. But it's like, yeah, well, our guy did that too. And then it moves beyond that, and you have like the tragedies written in the 4th century BCE, and you have the character of Theseus changing there over time as well, with especially Oedipus at Colonus, which is late Sophocles, I think. Might be wrong, but I think it's still Sophocles, and it's a very interesting tragedy. It's about Oedipus, after he's sent away, blinded and sent away from Thebes, and he ends up in this holy ground, this holy area near Athens, in Colonus, obviously, and it's a holy ground, so no one can kill him there, because it's obviously forbidden and would be terrible to do that. And he decides not to leave that place, and then everyone still wants to kill him because of all the stuff that Oedipus has done, because that is also unholy. And then they work through all of that. And the interesting thing there is that Theseus is at the time king of Athens in the tale, but he says some very interesting things where he's like, yeah, but I'm only king by the power of my people, and the people will decide, and I'll abide by their will, which is definitely not what you see in very early Theseus myths that are very much about pedophilia and all kinds of other terrible things. But in that part, he's like, suddenly he's like a fan of democracy, an inventor of democracy, which is the big conflict during that time in the middle of the 4th or second half of the 4th century BCE, when you have the Peloponnesian War and the conflict between the Attic system, in a way, the Attic Sea League, the Attic League on the one hand, and at least the democracy in Athens at the time, compared to the oligarchy or aristocracy, or however you want to define whatever the system that happens in Sparta at the same time. And suddenly Theseus is a champion of democracy, because that's what he has to be in that moment to be that figure of identity and of identification. And that's something I found really interesting back then. And I feel you can make a similar point with Arthurian legend. And that's what I'll try to do with the next video. So you got a preview right now, but I want to make points. I want to have things to cite and make references for my points, which is why I'll spend the next week gorging myself on Arthuriana, which will obviously be a lot of fun. I'll be full of knighthood, as someone said. Yeah, it was changed significantly for the Omnibus Ori, and yeah, Jin, it's largely manufactured. You have different elements of Arthurian legend in, for example, Welsh and Irish myth and stuff like that. You have some bits on the continent and in France, and you have some bits in England, but mostly it was like manufactured for like very different aspects. Like the first like major mention of Arthur is famously in what's his name, Gregory. I think it's Gregory of Monmouth, who writes a history of the kings of England, and he mentions Arthur in there, including he also mentions Merlin in there. Yeah, it's definitely like take that in a way. I mean, you have all these like different characters around the round table. They're basically a boy group with all the drugs and scandals when they get older as well. But yeah, that's the point. So it starts to get manufactured like that, and you have like the courtly romances written in France in like the 12th, 13th century. And for example, Lancelot, so Lancelot du Lac, is invented by a French writer who wanted to have like French knights hanging out with Arthur in that circle. It's a very large collection of tales that all kind of sometimes intersect, but not always. And in a way, that's what you get there. And so you have someone, inventing a French knight, which is Lancelot, who is obviously even better than anyone else. And then you come back to Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century. And boy, that guy was a really funny guy. And he takes a lot of these French Arthurian legends by, what's his name, Chrétien de Troyes, however you pronounce the name, right? And he takes those and translates and, orders them, edits them into what is, still has a French name, which is Les Morts d'Arthur, but it's an English book. And then you move from there and change it over time into all kinds of other elements, basically. So yeah, Arthurian legend was definitely manufactured and constructed, and it is very much tied into British identity in a lot of ways, which is, for example, what Lavi Tidar deconstructs in his, deconstructs in By Force Alone, which makes it very interesting, because the idea that mythology is connected to identity and used for or abused for all kinds of nefarious nationalist purposes is something that's been around for a long time. Oh, nice. That she explains a lot of that. That's good to know. I'm really looking forward to reading that book. It's also very short, so I assume that one will be cool. But you said that you read Spear Ori and that you really liked it, right? So yeah, that's sort of where I'm going for with the next Sunday school video. But it might take a week to actually record that. So tomorrow I'll just try to make the Maror video. And then someone made very explicit threats that they will take dangerous actions if I don't contact Lavi Tidar and ask him for an interview for my channel. So I'll do that before someone else does the things they threaten to do. So that's the idea there, I guess. All right, I'll just have a quick look and see how that despised Brandon Sanderson video is doing so far. As I said, I'm willing to discuss anything in that video all the time. That's my point. And obviously the thumbnail is somewhat over the top, but it felt like a good idea when I made it, when I had the idea, I guess. Well, apparently I'm not yet fallen below the 1,070 subscribers that I had earlier this morning. So that's something, I guess. And it has 7 likes. That's good. I guess it probably has like hundreds of dislikes, but YouTube's no longer showing them. Well, 48 views. That's not too bad. I'm fine with all of that. I assume people have said bad things in the comments, or maybe not, because I'm also worried that me being me, I rarely get that many comments. No comments. It's pretty good. I guess we're safe, and I'm not yet completely nuked off the platform, which nice. No, he wasn't very magical there, biggest. No, it wasn't you who made the threats. It was John, who is maybe here by now or still out doing John things. The person who makes my thumbnails, the friend that makes my thumbnails, and is currently my game master in the Dark Heresy game we played earlier today, and it was a lot of fun. And we blew up a building. Well, someone else blew up the building because we are very incompetent. But we recruited someone. Well, it did exist. It finally got published like 5 minutes before the stream, Jin, because it was rendering while I was playing the game on Discord, and apparently that slowed down my computer so much that it took forever to render. Because here's a tip: don't use FFmpeg unless you really need to. I haven't done it in real life yet, Jin, but I'm pretty sure I can do that if I want to. Yeah, that might be an idea with a male stripper body. I'm not sure if the whole like a simp thing would have worked as well, because usually simp is obviously used by sexist men, like terrible people, to insult other people that like women, because the whole discourse about female presenting people on the more or less social internet is obviously extremely toxic and dumb, because dudes are insecure, or so I've heard. Hey, also, how are you doing? That might be like, now we have two people with Native American background in one very small stream. I guess diversity is working. I did read the Wired article on Sanderson, Johnny. In fact, I made a very somewhat provocational video about it going live just before the stream. I read the article. I think the article is fine. Which, why are you frustrated, Oso? I feel like, I mean, the article is obviously not a masterpiece of journalism, but it's also not very bad. I've read much worse, like these personal, like portrait kind of journalist hangs out with an artist or other person of interest and talks about like how their life is like, to sort of give you that idea of like who they are and why they are important, or how they deal with specific aspects of their life. That kind of portrait journalism, I've read some of those that are much harsher, much harsher than the thing about Sanderson. It's like the bit about the child and the salt. You could have cut that. It's a bit not good, but the larger gist of the article, I think, was fine. It could have made a few things much clearer, which I would have preferred, but overall, I think it's a fine article. It's nothing to get upset about, is my point. It's not a hit piece. Come on, it's not a hit piece. If I ever make the Brandon Sanderson is the culture industry video, that will be a hit piece. I can tell you that. Oh, art stuff, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you'll figure out. Good luck with that. No, it's definitely not a hit piece. It's just it's a personality profile, which makes sense because Brandon Sanderson is a personality, and Brandon Sanderson as a personality is the brand by now. It's not his books. It's like the whole way he presents himself and his books that has made him the person he is. So you can't just go and criticize Brandon Sanderson's books without also talking about Brandon Sanderson the person. It's the other side of the whole apotheosis of the author that I spoke about earlier, right? Is that's the problem, right? It's like, if you tie yourself through social media, through your podcast, through all of these elements, if you tie yourself so much to a text, to your writing, to your work, because it's your brand, it's your companies. In his case, it's literally his company, right? If you do all of that, it means that well, if people gonna criticize the brand of Brandon Sanderson, they'll also talk about the person. So yeah, it's just like the age we live in nowadays with the way that capitalism has exploits parasocial relationships to make money. That's what capitalism does, which is why it sucks. And it's just that part. And I feel like the main issue is that fantasy fans and the fantasies community, in a way, has sort of been outside of or is lagging behind a general move, general societal trends in a way. And now it has arrived. I mean, he wasn't like the perfect writer or anything. But I feel like the way it was phrased, especially in Sanderson's reply on Reddit, and like, oh, the guy doesn't know anything about fantasy and he's attacking us as fantasy fans. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. He writes about like how he claims, I mean, I obviously don't know because I don't know the guy. It's like, yeah, I've been reading fantasy and science fiction for all my life. And I've read 20 Sanderson novels. I'm like, yeah, well, he's not a noob. He's not an outsider. He's just an outsider to the very specific bubble of Brandon Sanderson fandom. That's my point here. And the way it was framed in Sanderson's reply and so forth, I felt was disingenuous there, because he builds up, and that makes sense, right? He builds up that idea of us versus them, which is what we nerds tend to fall into, because we still feel we have that lingering, complex of feeling, disenfranchised by society, which is obviously no longer true, but we still do that. As far as I know, biggest, Muhammad rode into heaven from that one mountain, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is exactly one of those places that everyone fights about. So he did quite literally ascend, but it's not like directly after writing the Quran. It took a while to do that. Also, I doubt Sanderson has like a cool flying horse the way that Muhammad has. So I'm fine with that. Late June. That's interesting. Hello, welcome here. And Max Sam, also welcome. I hope you enjoy what we're doing here, or you want to yell at me, which is also fine. We're just still talking about the Brandon Sanderson thing and other bits and pieces of stuff that happened recently, because, yeah. So my plan was to have the video out earlier, and then everyone get mad at me and join the live stream to yell at me, which would, drive up the algorithm. So much for me doing social media marketing. It doesn't work. But in case I get a lot of like negative comments and shit like that, yeah, of course they're trying to be edgy, because you need to be somewhat edgy if you're living off, making clicks and getting attention. That's the attention industry that we're living in. Of course they are. Yeah, you can definitely yell at me and enjoy it at the same time. That's totally fine. I've been to a lot of metal concerts. I'm used to yelling, and I may be slightly deaf anyway, so that's totally fine. Well, yeah, that would be troubling, Jin. That's true. But see, um, I already have like the perfect comeback. Should I get like a lot of backlash and stuff, I will definitely make my next video going through all these comments and replying to them, and I'll call it "Did I accidentally trigger this large fantasy community?" I already want that, and I know exactly what kind of thumbnail I want to have for that, and copy for that. So that's that's my secret long-term plan. Yeah, Sanderson does. Yeah, but that's the point, because he has a large following, a large parasocial following that does take attacks or like slight criticisms or things that are not praise of Sanderson as personal insults, and then they react the only way they know how to react on the internet, which is insult people or maybe send them death threats. I don't know. That's just, yeah. I figured you might appreciate that biggest. I was very proud when I realized I could actually do that now, and I was like, wow, it's as if I had planned it, which I haven't. But you take what you can get. So that's sort of my plan for now. As I said, I feel like the video is more serious than thumbnail and title suggest, but you know, I was trying my hand at clickbait. I expect it happened. It worked. I don't know which infamous YouTuber you mean. I haven't read Way of Kings though. I only read the first, like the Era One Mistborn, and I read The Alloy of Law, which I did actually kind of like. I mean, it wasn't great or anything, but I feel like the buddy cop kind of vibe that he has in Alloy of Law, that works really well for Sanderson. I guess it's hard to fuck up if you have like a bunch of cool one-liners and witty dialogue kind of thing going, and so I guess it's easy to do. But that was fun. Hey Varsha, how are you? Um, yeah. So we will see how all of that stuff goes with Sanderson. Yeah, he does have haters, but I feel it's very difficult. The problem is that while Sanderson has haters, there is no real critical discourse that goes beyond either, yeah, he's a Mormon and he writes bad, and that's not enough. And I feel the article did kind of go down that route slightly by talking about like his understanding of what he's doing and how his religion may influence what he's doing in a way, but it never actually went like really down that road, which is a shame, because it's the whole idea that there's a lot of Mormon fantasy and science fiction writers out there, like a lot of them, right, is interesting in a way. I'm not saying it's concerning. I'm just saying, look, there's a lot of people that are very successful. Stephanie Meyer, Orson Scott Card, Brandon Sanderson, all these other. What's the guy? Brian McClellan? Is that his name? The guy who does the Powder Mage stuff? I think he might be also a Mormon. And stuff. So there's a lot of these authors that come out of the Brigham Young University fantasy writing course, and that makes a lot of sense. But the question is like, that's not exactly a politically neutral place to learn. Now, no university is politically neutral. That's obviously true, but it's also one with a very specific religious background. So it makes a lot of sense to not just hate them for that, which is dumb, right? But to, at least examine if that has an influence and an impact on their writing, on these fantasy writings, which are hugely successful. So, like, maybe we should be aware of that and look at it. It's like, how could that be a problem or not? Is my point. Oh God, chores sound bad. I need to wash dishes so badly. I've been putting it off for quite a while now. So yeah, but I won't do that tonight. It's already 10 p.m. here, so I'll probably do that tomorrow, maybe. Oh, so that might be the case. That it never condemned speculation. I mean, if you read the Book of Mormon, you understand why. They are very, open to that kind of stuff, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And in case you're wondering why I'm saying this and talking about the Book of Mormon and stuff, well, I do have one here on my desk, right here, because it's important to show proof. Yeah, I haven't read that story, but Ori, yeah, this is kind of the unofficial Lavi Tidar simp channel at this point, I feel. It does have a lot of rules, like a magic system, and the author of the Wired piece does point that out. And Sanderson says, like, yeah, obviously that does, impact my writing, which is really interesting stuff. And that core sentence, like, I build worlds like God builds humans, is like, yeah, that right there is something where I would go and actually, ask more questions afterwards, which the guy didn't do. So you can call it bad journalism for that. I'm fine with that, but that question needed to be asked, and that question, and then that bit needed to be put out, because that does obviously impact how people create worlds and create, do their writing and their reasons for writing books. Because I think while authorial intent might not be the be all end all of literary criticism, asking the question, why write, is just as important as asking the question why read, which is what Joanna does and did earlier today, but she's done with it for today. So I guess the only person still live streaming in BookTube is Matt with his friends on books. But I I don't have friends. I only have enemies and people that I haven't met yet, I guess. But yeah, so that's certainly part of the issue there. It's like Mormonism does influence Sanderson's writing, which is fine. Look, you read Gene Wolfe, I read Gene Wolfe, I love Gene Wolfe, but the Catholicism does influence Gene Wolfe. That's there, and it's just another thing that you need to do, that you can take into account when you read a text. Once you know it, it's like, yeah, that's additional information that will slightly shift the lens that I read this text through. So having that, I feel, is not a bad thing. Yeah, I don't know if I would like to compare my work to the Mormon God, but it's sort of the idea of subcreation right there, which Sanderson didn't mention because I don't know, and the author also didn't mention because probably he hasn't read On Fairy Stories by J.R.R. Tolkien. But that's the idea of devout Catholic J.R.R. Tolkien, which is what fantasy writers do when they write fairy stories. They subcreate, because Tolkien believed that the urge to create is innate to humans, because they are built in the image of God, and God has an urge to create, or at least a demiurge. Sorry for that one. So humans have that too, and so what they do when they write fantasy books or write stories, they create worlds. They subcreate under the in the creation of God. Humans subcreate worlds of their own, which are ideally, so Tolkien believes, I'm saying that reflections of that higher creation. So he's not wrong there, Sanderson. It's just like, yeah, it's a very specific kind of God right there. So what's the issue with the thumbnail parameter? I would like, as a very toxically masculine white cis hetero dude, I am willing to listen to people with a different view on things there. So let me know what you don't like about the thumbnail. The other part, I mean, the other part, it is a very uncharitable interpretation, but I thought I made it very clear that I can't judge him. It just does have that side effect. There's all the chances in the world that this is very much, um, how Sanderson feels, and that's great. And maybe he's just like very lucky in that regard, and I'm fine with that. On the other hand, he runs a business, and I assume that someone of his size, metaphorically speaking here, or like public presence, does have people who support him when it comes to public relations and stuff like that. Also, I'm a miserable fuck. I just hate. I just love to give people very uncharitable interpretations. That's just what I do. But yeah, I'd be willing to talk about the thumbnail. It was an inspiration I had while carrying a box of beers, so I might have been, how can I say, even more toxically masculine than usual. It's like you carry a box of beers as a dude, and your beard starts growing even more, and your voice goes deeper, and yeah, these kind of things happen exactly in that moment. Or so I wish to believe. Not necessarily true, though. I was not carrying the box shirtless. It is unfortunately still too cold to do that. I only take my shirt off for making mead. But yeah. It definitely is a DM moment, John. Yeah. Well, I'm willing to help it. I'm carrying it. It was my responsibility. I did an awareness check and I failed it, like all the other awareness checks I rolled today. But I'm still trying to figure out why people think it's a problem. Oh no, that is bad. Also, I'm so sorry. Just go and carry a bunch of boxes of beers, and it will make you feel very, masculine, and your beard will grow in no time. Yeah. See, the problem, Big, is that John is almost as good at listening to people as I am, which is part of the problem. The beard on the inside, yeah, that's true. The true beard is the friends we made along the way, which I guess means mine is going to fall off any minute now. And yes, John did melt my face, which was because I was really dumb and my character attacked a guy with a blaster, a las gun, and I just ran at him with an axe. Yeah, that's bad, I guess. Also, what kind of beard did you have though? Like, was it like a full beard or just a mustache, or what are you going for? Also, yeah, it serves you right for shaving, for trimming. Because I just don't trim mine because I'm too lazy for that stuff. Rainbow colored beard sounds pretty cool. Yeah, full beard from laziness. I totally get that. It's very much my vibe. Yeah, I don't know. Like the objections I've heard so far were like it's transphobic and it's sexist, and I'm like, I can see the sexism. I'm not sure if I can see the transphobia, but I'm very much willing to listen to ideas there. Yeah, that's a good backup plan there with the beard. Well, it turns out, Jin, that's exactly my bonus here. I can't see it. Yeah, there's a thing with like the receding hairline in Terry Pratchett in, I keep forgetting which one it is. It might be Nightwatch, where he talks about like how his hair is receding. It's like, yeah, on the one hand, it's like less hair to comb, but on the downside, it's also more face to wash, which is a problem. So I guess you're figuring that one out with the beard. Luckily so far my hair is not retreating that much, which yeah, I guess maybe I'm lucky in that regard, which probably means that I have like very, very little testosterone and I'm actually not as manly as I think I am, despite lifting all these boxes. Wow, now we have 3 people with Native American heritage in the chat. We're like, wow. Also, hello, Ben. So yeah, what else was I going to say about that? Well, nothing more. Yeah, I've decided not to make the video on masculinity. I was thinking about it, and I also figured that I'm maybe not the right person to do that, because it would be me talking about disability and stuff, and I don't want to do that all the time because it sometimes does feel like whining, which it definitely isn't, but it's like part of the there's the idea of like internalized misogyny, but I think there's also internalized ableism, and I think it's very strong in me. Okay, Paromita. Yeah, I know it's sexist in that regard. I do understand that. I'm aware of the way that you can see that as sexist. So my point was obviously to make a joke about the way that discourse about objectifying online personalities, mostly female personalities, is part of like online discourse in that regard, which is why we took that the body of famous internet person, streamer, and other aspects, Amaranth, for that, because that's part of that simping discourse in a way. But I'm aware of the fact that it can seem extremely sexist. I guess it's part of that problem where you're like, wow, you can read this ironically, but you can also take it at face value, and at face value, it is bad. If that makes any sense. So that was my reasoning behind it. But I'm also aware that yes, you can see it as very sexist, and Kadia was talking about maybe exchanging it for like a male stripper body. I'm not sure if that would still give the same meaning. But yeah, I can see that. I can see that argument. That's true. Because maybe I should have contextualized that more in the video. I guess that might have helped to make sure where the idea comes from. And even then, I see what you mean. I still think it works as a joke, but then again, I'm a guy. I've rarely been objectified in my life, so that maybe it's part of not knowing. So yeah, I'm willing to hear people on that. Is my point here, and then I will probably think about it, and then if I come up with a good idea, I'll ask John about it, and then he'll grumble at me and say "told you so," which is fine. The apotheosis of Sanderson, yeah. I think John made a thumbnail about that last year for me when I was talking about something related to that other subject, and he just took the apotheosis of I keep forgetting whom and put Samson's head in there. But there's a bunch of apotheosis images, like medieval paintings out there that you could use. And there's a fun thing there with the apotheosis idea, right? So it's mostly like part of the Roman history and Roman emperors, where Roman emperors, when they died, became gods of that like state cult in a way after Augustus. And if you read Suetonius, which is maybe not a very accurate but a very fun source on the first 12 emperors, right? There's a quote in there about is it Septimus Severus? I don't know. One later emperor, and he's dying, and apparently, according to Suetonius, his last words like, "Oh gods, I'm deifying," which means, yeah, I'm apparently becoming a god, which also means, okay, I guess I'm dying. Yeah, biggest. I know. I would objectify you as well if I could. But yeah. But see, that's the point. It's like, yeah, I thought the thumbnail was smart and funny too, but as I said, like I have experienced no sexual harassment and no sexist objectification in my life. At least I think so. And no, I have not Googled my name for pictures and stuff yet, which I will probably never do. Apotheosis is a great word. Yes, you can do so much with it. But yeah, that's the point. Like the becoming god thing is like, I love the idea of a Roman emperor dying. It's like, okay, I guess I'm becoming a god now. And it was, oh, I guess he's dying. Takes some balls to say that. That's the way to do your ascension. Oh, that's an interesting question. Is that sort of where Erickson and Esselmont got their idea for ascension from? Because a lot of that is about dying and then becoming a god. That. I guess I should ask them if I talk to them. Which reminds me, the Forge of the High Mage is coming out next week. 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, and I'm really excited to read it. And I have the contact for Ian Cameron Esselmont. I got it from AP Canavan, and I've delayed messaging him and asking for an interview. So I figure after Forge of the High Mage is out might be a good point to actually contact him and talk about these kind of things. And maybe I'll remember to ask him if they got the idea of ascending into godhood from the Roman idea of apotheosis, which wouldn't make sense considering that the Malazan Empire is somewhat Roman. Yeah, might be the Greek hero cults. That makes sense as well. But I mean, those things are related in a lot of ways. Yeah, I'm super excited about Forge of the High Mage. I think the title is dumb. I did like Gistal more. I understand why they changed it, but it's too close to Forge of Darkness in my brain. What with a lot of like Malazan fans being sort of like these Steven Erickson ultras, I'm like maybe something less less similar to like an Erickson title would maybe help Esselmont more to be, you know, his own person, or like perceived as his own person and own author, and not just as the other guy that writes Malazan books, which always, you know, kind of pisses me off. As far as I know, they already were considered gods in some way, Kadya. I'm not quite sure because I never studied Egyptology. Because unfortunately, the Department for Egyptology was shut down in Marburg before I could get to it. But, you know. I don't know why it got changed. The fantasy thinker. I don't know why it got changed. I assume for marketing purposes, because if you call a book just Gistal, it's a fantasy word. It's kind of difficult to market that, but the Forge of the High Mage does sound, you know, is more accessible, I guess. That's my assumption, but I'm not quite sure. And it might work. I mean, there might also be people that profit. You know, there might also be some profit in, like, you know, being more similar to Forge of Darkness and being more similar to like an Erickson book. It might help, because I assume Erickson still very much outsells Esselmont when it comes to books. But I don't know. You know, I like to speculate. Yeah, that's true. But assail is still like an English word, right? I mean, that's one of those fun things where, yeah, assail is an English word, but it's also a name. Kind of weird thing. But yeah, that's true. Assail to Gestalt. Well, I mean, I'm not working at is it Penguin? It might be Penguin by now. There's only one fantasy author who ever managed to actually create interesting and working languages, and that's Tolkien. And that's really great. Because even though some videos might give a different image or impression, I do very much appreciate Tolkien's works in a lot of ways. And approaching world building through language was definitely a brilliant stroke for him, and worked well. And that's why his fantasy languages actually make sense and do work, because they have that connection to the world. Because even if Herder is wrong about everything, it does make for good stories, which is one of those things like bogus science and bad science does make for really good inspirations for especially fantasy writers. Like, stuff that is not true, or maybe not true, can often make for really interesting, like, ideas or concepts, or a basis for fantasy world building and writing, which is, you know, why stuff like what's his name, James Fraser's The Golden Bough, or Robert Graves' The White Goddess are absolutely brilliant for fantasy writers, because it may be wrong in our world, but you can go and imagine a world that is built on these ideas in a way. And I think Tolkien does something similar with Herder. But, and that's sort of my problem with Tolkien sometimes, is like, he seems to actually believe that Herder is right, and that gets you to some dark places. Yeah, that might be an idea to ask Ian that. That's a good idea. But yeah, so yeah, as I said, like, weird and out there academic theories make for incredibly good and fruitful inspiration for world building and fantasy, which is, you know, for example, the whole like bicameral mind theory by Julian Jaynes is another one of those books that are like, yeah, that's I don't think it's true, but it gave us at least Snow Crash, and it inspired Erickson, and it did apparently inspire R. Scott Baker, and I'm pretty sure it also did did inspire Terry Pratchett when it came to writing Small Gods. So I don't care if if James was right about like the evolution of the brain, but man, he certainly did some good right there. So yeah, that's something that I feel often gets ignored, like how good bad science is actually for writers, because you can take those ideas and run with them and extrapolate from them, because you don't have to extrapolate from the physics of our world. You can just take someone else's idea of like how the world works. Like there's one text that I came across, and I still want someone to do that. It's basically anime manga world building to the core, and that's a text from the 18th century. I need to look up the writer. He's an English writer from like around the deists cycles from the 1750s, and he wrote a book explaining the world, the universe, and that how all planets are populated by angels, and Earth, and that's how he tried to solve the idea of the what's it called, a theodicy issue of like why our world is shit. And he's like, well, this planet is in fact there's a bit of Gnosticism in there as well. This planet is in fact the prison, or the prison planet of the fully populated universe, with populated by angels universe. This is the prison planet for fallen angels to go through their lives to then be redeemed and become good angels again. And that was his theology from the 18th century. And that, I feel, would make for a very good, world building for a plotline for like a manga and an anime. Just saying. And I realize we're very much in like the extremely weird history of religion and philosophy weeds here. But I feel like, knowing these kind of stories is, it'll hopefully at least entertain some people, I guess. Yes, I'm wearing a Slow Fact t-shirt, and it's the one from their album. It's a heavy metal band named after the character from the 2000 AD comics. And the album this t-shirt is from, it's called Traveler, which is a concept album about the pen and paper role-playing game called Traveler. So this is like extremely nerdy on like multiple layers. This is meta nerddom that I'm partaking here. Yeah, that idea is pretty good. I want to build like a world for like a role-playing game which has this like whole like 4 elements kind of thing going. And yeah, it never went anywhere, but it had like elemental dragons, and the Earth was actually like the world was actually sort of not a globe, but somewhat somewhat square is also the wrong word. Anyway, the point was that like the further you went to like one cardinal direction, the more that element took over in a way. And at the end of that is where like the actual elemental dragon of that world lived. So you could go one place, and it ended like basically in sea and water and water and water until you hit the point of the water dragon, or one place that became very, very cold indeed, or whatever, earth, water, fire, and wind. And you had like one place that became hotter and hotter until you actually ended like up in full fire and shit like that. So it was good when it lasted. I was 15. Yeah, hating Aristotle is objectively correct. I agree with that very much. I'd rather go back in my cave and watch shadow plays than read Aristotle. if that makes any sense. And the answer always is we could go out of the cave and look at the light and see the world, but all we do is say, "Do deformed rabbit." It's my favorite. But yeah, so now you know more about my role-playing game mastering history and world-building history. It never went anywhere. Like we played a bunch of games in there. In that, I ran a bunch of games in there with like a homebrew system and everything, just like the good nerds we were at the time. And then one character became really angry and started breaking people's kneecaps to get, answers. And then things got like ugly and we switched games because no one knew how to actually deal with the fact that suddenly everyone is torturing people and then using their magic to revive people to torture them again. And I'm like, well, this is not the game we had in mind. Maybe we should actually switch to like a darker game if that's what everyone wants to do. So yeah, what else did I want to say? I'm confusing myself, I guess. The whole Tolkien thing, I felt like mostly that video did go over well with my point that I was trying to make. Not with everyone, but it kind of, and that's the fun thing, right? The ironic thing that like the thing I was talking about with Tolkien, and it took me like a week to make that video. I did like the first version last Friday. And then I made like different versions over the week. And John has probably seen them all by now and hated them all. But the idea of, the Tolkien cult that I was talking about is exactly the same thing that is happening with Sanderson now, just with the difference that through, social media and the personalization that social media enforces and stuff like that, it's been accelerated by, immediacy. And it's like, we don't have like these mechanisms of, acceptance by the academic field and all of this stuff. No, it's very direct now because now, everyone gets to do this. So it was kind of interesting for me to, publish that video the day that the whole the whole Sanderson thing started, and I'm like, yeah, that's the same thing, just a different author. And in my view, probably, less deserving, although deserving is like the wrong way to look at it. It's like, if people read a Sanderson book or any other book, really, if people read a fantasy book or, even a picture book, like if you read a book and it gives you joy, I am happy for you, and that's great. And, read books, read Sanderson sometimes. But yeah, it's still like, it felt interesting to me to have that weird, I don't want to call it a coincidence, but that's the thing. Beyond that, well, we'll see how the whole thing does. Dead ringers for lore. Yeah, that's definitely a way to put it. I'm sorry you were like, starting all these really good puns or bad puns, depending on what you want to say, biggest. And then I just made the video without those jokes and did my own thing there with the cult of St. John of Oxford. Yeah, the comparison is definitely there with those two authors. And that's where you hit like a very interesting problem that I often hit, because from where I'm standing, Tolkien's work is superior in every single aspect that I'm able to judge, which is, mostly my personal taste and stuff like that, to what Sanderson does. So it's super easy to then go like, well, in very, pseudo-educated, pseudo-intellectual ways, I'll go o tempora o mores, and I'm like, oh, well, in these times everyone is dumb, so they like Sanderson and don't understand the idea of like the greatness of J.R.R. Tolkien, which would be playing into that whole idea once again of like Tolkien being great. Also, I am not I'm not a conservative person. I think overall things are getting better over time and not worse. So I always get suspicious when people are like, yeah, stuff was so much better earlier, and social media is breaking everything, which is sort of with the whole reading's bad nowadays because everyone is using Goodreads and shit like that. And it's like, the internet is destroying everything. It's like, no, it's making things different, but it's not making things worse. And succumbing to this like weird technical skepticism, or I don't know, the whole like kids these days kind of discourse is just always making me very suspicious, I guess is the term here. And that's sort of where I feel where I'm trying to figure out how to say that Sanderson's books are not very good without saying, but Tolkien's better. The answer obviously is to say, like, Sanderson's books are boring, and if you want to have like a powerful and meaningful representation of, say, conflicts, mental health, and all these other things, I don't know, go read N.K. Jemisin, for example. Nostalgia is a mental trap, and I think yeah, they probably haven't had to split wood, that's true. Nostalgia is powerful, of course, and ooh, that's a good point, John. I'll think about something very sexy dinosaur-y. All right. See you later, John. Thanks for showing up. Yeah. So back to the nostalgia thing. See, nostalgia is powerful, but also, and that I feel is where things get difficult. Is like nostalgia is sort of that refuge we go to because we imagine things were better then, when shit gets too hard. And the world right now is not exactly a nice place, especially if you're part of any form of marginalized group whatsoever. Shit sucks. So going back to nostalgia is very tempting in a way, and you can't fault anyone for doing that. That's Chuck Tingle is definitely a better author than Brandon Sanderson. I 100% subscribe to that, and I've read both. Yeah. Also, I guess you missed out. Your inner Jordan Peterson is shaking his head in despair and crying. But that's sort of the problem, right? Like nostalgia is very tempting because we are living in, depending on where we are, like rough times. So retreating to like that cozy place, it kind of parallels with that rising trend of cozy fantasy in ways. Like, people are tired of struggling all the time and fighting all the time, and I feel that's partly the tough problem, right? It's like, when I did that video like last year about like whether Nazis have a right to escapism, the problem is that certain parts of society in the more conservative side of things, because they are losing some of their privileges, or at least see a small diminishment in some of their privileges, they suddenly feel marginalized in a way that they are objectively not, which makes them retreat further into nostalgia as well. And while there's no reason, like objectively, their feeling of marginalization or oppression or whatever you want to call it is wrong, objectively wrong, because they're not oppressed. But the feeling is still valid because losing privilege still feels like someone stepping on you in a way. So I get why they retreat into stuff like fantasy, where things used to be fine and everything was solved in a very manly white cis hetero way, full of knighthood, as they say, which is in fact one of the quotes I learned from rereading Thomas Mallory, that King Arthur was full of knighthood and nightly ignored the pain. Which may sound creepier than it was meant, but it certainly sounds creepy. Especially with the echoes of the Chuck Tingle mention still in the background. I'm really, like, unironically looking forward to Chuck Tingle's full-length novel later this year, Camp Damascus. I will definitely read it, and I'll probably talk about it in detail, because I think it has the potential to be really good, even though there might not be any dinosaurs in it. Yeah, they're not, but you're right, Jin. Like, people, and that's part of the problem, right? It's like the way that, like, ancient Greece, you have this idea of, like, the classical canon and stuff like that. It's like classical Greece, and then it's Rome, and then it's Protestantism, and we try to gloss over all the Catholicism happening in between. And we definitely don't want to, I talk about the idea that maybe Jews invented all the stuff that we then turned into our religion. And we're now the heirs of those very, very Aryan white Greeks who invented democracy, just like we're doing it now in the United States of America. And the levels of the layers of people falling for propaganda in that one is just ridiculous. Like, yeah, it's just fascinating how many times people, were misrepresenting all kinds of things. And when you talk about the idea that, the revival of the classical canon of, like, Greek and Roman philosophy in the Renaissance, well, in French, I guess you say Renaissance, but, in that era was sort of what a lot of people in philosophy and so forth did to discredit up to a point, or take power away from, well, the church and religion. You talk about these, the French philosophers, like atheists of the 17th and 18th century. Those guys are like, yeah, let's go there. You read, what's his name? David Hume. He's like, well, polytheism is better than monotheism in all kinds of ways, because it's more tolerant and stuff like that. And then you come to a place like, the United States of America, and they're like, well, we're just like Greece with its perfect democracy and its very powerful Christian monotheism that has nothing to do with the Jews. They just run our banks. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. That's that takes a level of, like, unawareness that is ridiculous, like willful ignorance, I guess. But it's pretty impressive. No dinosaurs. Yeah, that's definitely. I assume there will be no dinosaurs. From what I can tell, it is about conversion therapy, and its ills, which are many, and its horrors. So, yeah, medieval Europe wasn't white either. Like, I mean, whiteness is, as we all know, a construction. Nothing was white. Like medieval Europe was way more multicultural than people usually imagine. Yeah. Yeah, no. Ancient Greece wasn't extremely white. Neither was was Rome. But see, that's part of, like, the romantic era in especially Germany, but generally, like, the romantic movement in the 19th century, that they, like, whitewash a lot of stuff there, because suddenly you have that idea of, white people being the important people and stuff like that. And it's a super fascinating part. It's sort of where I'm going with that second, like, the follow-up to the anti-Semitism video that is out there. And I'm going down that route, but it takes a lot of reading on like how, the construction of mythology, the way that you take Herder's ideas of like connecting a national identity being that like combination of like the landscape, like the environment, the language, the mythologies, all of these things building into like a national character, and how that stuff is then used to build national identities and try to connect them with all kinds of mythologies. And that's something that then like goes straight into fantasy in a lot of ways, which is, you know, why say Middle Earth has a lot of really troubling blood and soil rhetoric and ethnostates, which is clearly what Tolkien liked in a way. I mean, he wasn't thinking about it that way, and I mean, Tolkien was not an anti-Semite or even like a nationalist in any like meaningful way, but these ideas kind of come into that in that more like romantic way that leave it very open for that. But you know, you read Tolkien, it's like every people live in their own place and they all look the same in that very specific place, and no one travels, almost no one travels unless it's like, you know, an official visit or something, and they all need to have like their pure whatever blood, and Aragorn is better than anyone else because he has purer blood. And I'm like, I don't know, man. That does sound awfully bad if you know, transfer that to any other place than Middle Earth. But you have all these elements in there because of that construction or that attempt of constructing, say, identities in that way. And the question is like, is that partly because you needed to have, in a way, part of that identity building or narrative building stepped into a vacuum left by the, you know, loss of meaning or loss of hegemony that Christianity had in medieval, not in, yeah, Christianity had that hegemony in at least like the early modern age. And the question is like, if the loss of that hegemony near the end of the 18th century and like during the 19th century, because that certainly, you know, that disenchantment that Weber calls disenchantment, right? If that does, you know, leave like vacuums that people try to fill with these ideas, these kind of narratives, and give a certain meaning there, that would be an interesting question to, you know, study more about. But the problem that I'm facing is obviously I need to, you know, read those other books, and then I read more books and more books, and then I'll never make the video, which is, well, not too bad. Hey, Nif, how are you? I don't know what you're laughing about, Nif, but I hope it was a friendly laugh. Also, I'm glad to see you here. If you want to complain about the Brandon Sanderson video, I take complaints willingly. Nice. An off weekend is something that PhD students have very rarely. So yeah, I was just talking about, like, you know, Tolkien's ethno states and stuff like that. Glad you liked the video. So where did I want to go next with talking and stuff? How long have I been talking, actually? Let me check the time, because I don't know. Oh wow, 2 hours. That's a lot. Yeah, I mean, do we have like other questions that I really should have been talking about? I mean, I promised to talk about the talk. Well, I mean, the journalist wasn't the best of journalists, but I've seen much worse. I feel like I promised to talk about that 100 favorite fantasy list from Reddit kind of thing. Maybe I should do that, or at least have a look. I haven't even looked at it. I just saw like everyone on YouTube, on BookTube, were making like the videos about it. Like, So I don't know. No idea. I assume that our subject of today, that being Brandon Sanderson, is probably high up on that list. Top novels 2023. Our fantasy top novels 2023 results. I have it open now. I'll just have a quick look, and then I'll just shake my head in despair and weep into, I don't know, my wooden moose, probably, or my beer. If that makes any sense, which it probably doesn't, but you know, I feel like emotions are warranted at this point. Gods. I don't know what's to hate about Henry Cavill. I mean, I haven't watched anything he's in, but I mean, he unironically loves Warhammer 40k, I guess, which may or may not be a problem. I don't know. I certainly do like to play play in that game, but it's maybe not, you know, not the best of things out there. Because, you know, since Warhammer became, you know, serious, it lost a lot of its charm, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, right. And now the R fantasy thing is fucking around with my stream, because apparently Now I should be back. Now I should be back. I hope. I hope. Now that was weird. Can you hear me now? I hope. 'Cause I don't know what else I can do to make this work. Also, I really hope you can't hear me now because I suck at singing. I guess. Did it work? Did it not work? Who knows? Still nothing. I am back! Hooray! That sounds good. Yeah. In case you're still here, I'm sorry. What happened was I opened Reddit to look at that top 100 list, and my browser froze, and that apparently killed the stream. And then I had to restart the stream thing, and apparently I had to re-add my mic to the stream, which is all really bad. Anyway, I'm back. Thanks. I looked at the top 100 list while you all were hating me for being gone, and yeah, it's what it is. It's a very boring popularity thing. Sanderson being in there several times. Yeah, I guess. It's sort of why I didn't want to talk about it in like a video, because everyone's like, "Whoa, and this up there, and this is wrong." It's like, this is popularity, and what it tells you is what people like, and people like Brandon Sanderson, and there's a reason why. Yeah, and that is because Sanderson does write stories that are easy to digest, and that sort of leave us feeling like, we have a chance if we just are good enough, and then we'll actually succeed in a shit system, even though we might be slightly broken people, but only slightly, and we will still succeed if we are actually good, and that is comforting because it keeps us doing the things we do, and hoping for a miracle, or at least cheering for the people that get that miracle to become, powerful or whatever. But what it does not do is apparently, sadly, make us take torches and pitchforks to actually change the system, which is exactly what what the problem with Sanderson is. But it works extremely well because he does, supply all of that in a easy to read format. And Tolkien is very, still very popular because of all kinds of reasons. Malazan is on place 9. And that is definitely, well, we're still talking about people that are as terminally online as you have to be on Reddit. So it's a limited kind of sample. But yeah, Malazan is on point 10. And then you have, your usual stuff around that. I was surprised that Gentleman Bastards is still up there because, I don't know. I still think Gentleman Bastards is vastly overrated, but it also does fit into that sort of culture industry kind of thing that I still really need to talk about, that fantasy does supply. It's sort of fast paced, it's sort of witty, but in an easy to understand way, and it does not actually challenge anything, and you can just like move along, and the slightly broken, slightly slightly scarred and beat up characters will win at the end because they're good guys. And the actual system that led to all the trouble is never actually questioned. I feel like the first really important one there down that list is Broken Earth by N.K. Jemisin. Yeah, and Malazan, of course, because Malazan doesn't do that either. But a lot of these other books are very much that kind of stuff. And I'm always worried that we are, easily sort of trapped or tempted into this sort of that part of escapism, I guess. that, which is super interesting because you have that quote, and I think it's a Terry Pratchett quote. It's like, jailers hate escapism. And it was, what's his name? Chana Mieville who pointed out that no, jailers don't hate escapism. Jailers hate escape, or escapists. So as long as you go for the escapism in your head, and still function as part of the system that keeps you down, that kind of, fucks you over, as long as you do that, you're not actually, things never change, and that's sort of where the danger of a lot of entertainment in general lies. It's like it does lull us into just staying with the program in a way, and going home and reading our entertainment, then going back and doing the thing again next day. Yeah, Lies of Locke Lamora is not a good book. I mean, it's an entertaining book, but there's a lot of things wrong with it. Like, one thing that I found really interesting is like, and it took me like a reread of Lies of Locke Lamora, you don't know how any of these characters feel. You have like this weird, like, sort of third person, but it's not even. It's very limited third person, because you don't even get like Locke's inner thoughts or anything of the sort. None of these characters have like emotions beyond the dialogue. It's written like a TV script in a way. It's like, and that's very interesting, because there's like no like characterization beyond what you get on the page. And I find that very fascinating, because does Locke, rage against the system, or is he just like, oh, fuck it, I'll just, get my money, because, getting the bag is all that matters? And I don't know. Feels like a missed chance there, but maybe most people don't care about that stuff. I don't know. I mean, it is still very popular, and I get why, because, some of the dialogue is pretty witty and entertaining. I do appreciate that, but still, missed chances, so many of them. Which, I mean, might just be my problem. So beyond that, it's a popularity contest, which never tells you anything about the quality, unless you think that sales mean quality, which is a way of looking at things that I personally don't agree with. But I feel it's very difficult to argue that. It's like, it's popular, so it must be good. It's like, no, it must be easy to sell. Which I guess, is that. Well, I mean, in general, I feel like we might actually wrap this up now. It's been like over 2 hours, and the whole like breaking off of the stream kind of kicked a lot of people out, and I doubt they'll come back. So I do very much appreciate those of you like Ben and Oso who stayed, and thanks for watching and stuff. And I do really appreciate that. I hope it was fun. I hope it was interesting while it lasted and stuff. And I hope you get your thing, your art problem solved also. Yeah, you're right. Also, it did kind of go there, and then it didn't, because then the action was all that matters. So anyway, once again, I get distracted by myself. Once again, thanks for actually hanging out. I hope it was good. I'll have some more thinking about that thumbnail, which, sounded like a good idea when I had the idea. But, ideas. Thanks, Ben, for showing up. I hope it was entertaining and stuff. And I'll see you guys around, and stuff will happen, and I'll talk about Maror tomorrow, I hope. So once again, thanks for that, and I'll just try to find out how to actually close the fucking stream, which is more difficult than you might think. Here we go. This is the end of it all, I think, my friend. So yeah, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon. Cheers.